So we're going to get started this evening. I have lots to get through. I feel like a professor and have proceeded to come up with an outline and a prospectus and a syllabus for me to lecture from this evening. You get to look at me a little more than looking at my hands. Although that thumbnail is still sticking in there. All the other ones are gone, but that one thumbnail is still there. So we're going to talk about, first I'm going to talk about thread. Now, specifically, I'm going to talk about Aurifil thread because it is the one brand that we carry in the cotton world. So I want to talk about that. The information for the most part in terms of weights and sizes apply to all brands and across the cotton thread world. There's lots out there. We just prefer Aurifil for a couple of reasons. Virtually lint-free, strong. I like the way that it is linty, not linty in my machine. So I really like that because fabric is bad enough, let alone add thread to it. So I'm going to cover a little bit about Aurifil and a little bit about all of the, and I'm going to try to control my hands, all about the different weights of thread, suggested needles to use with those threads, and sometimes we don't use the same thread on top as we use in the bottom with some of the thicker weight threads. So we're going to cover a little bit about that. So first of all, Aurifil is a 100% Egyptian cotton. It's grown in the Mecca region of Egypt, which is on the Nile River, which is why if you've ever looked at the end of a Aurifil spool, and I'm going to look at it now and it's not going to have it on there, but sometimes it has the word Mako on it. And so that's letting you know that that's the region in which it came from. Aurifil is a long staple cotton, which means that it refers to the length of fiber that comes off the raw cotton boll to form single strands. So the longer the length of those fibers determines the higher quality the thread is. So that's how you kind of get, you know, the Cadillac of thread, and then you've got the Kia of thread in the thread world. So it all depends upon the base fiber that they use in it. Aurifil makes 4 types of thread. They make a wool cotton blend, a polyester, which I don't carry in the store. We use Isacord. Monofilament, they do make a nylon thread, which I have used. We don't carry that particular one. I've used it, I like it, but we have a tendency to stick with the monopoly, which is the polyester monofilament. Has a little more wear and tear when it comes to washing and drying than nylon does. So that's why I don't carry the Aurifil monofilament, but I will talk about it. And then they have 6 different weights of cotton thread, and we're going to cover them. Now, I am going to post additional information all on this, so don't think you have to hurry up and jot everything down if you want, but I will post kind of this little timeline that I'm following for you, as well as some additional information in the file section of this page so that you can use it to reference and save it for a later date. So you may be wondering why thread is weighted, why we refer to 40 weight cotton or 50 weight cotton, and I'm curious as to why those weights or how they come up with those weights. So cotton sewing thread is traditionally measured with the abbreviation of NE. Another thing that you will see sometimes on the bottom of a spool. So let me grab a larger spool of Aurifil because I know it's on the bottom of that spool. So, see if I can get it to focus. And I know it's backwards, but you will see underneath the word Aurifil, the word Mako, and the word NE. And then there's the number. So NE stands for Number English, which basically means that the number refers to how many hanks of cotton that it takes for that particular fiber to weigh 1 pound. hank equals 840 yards. And so this is a very knotty hank. And if anybody is so bored during quarantine and wants to untangle this, I will gladly let you untangle it.
Hand it over.
I'll hand it over.
Sorry.
So this is a hank, 840 yards. So 80 weight thread, which we'll talk about, is made up of 80 hanks. So it takes 80 of these in 80 weight thread to weigh 1 pound. That's also 80 hanks is 67,200 yards of thread. So that's where those numbers come from. And 40 weight thread is made up of 40 hanks to make that 1 pound of thread. Now, Aurifil thread is typically 2-ply, which is why, again, on the end of the spool, you're going to see 50/2. 2-ply means that 2 strands of the cotton fiber are wound or spun together or twisted together to create your finished product. A lot of times a misconception is that the weight of thread is based upon the finished product, but it's actually not. It's based upon the strands that go together to make the finished product. So kind of a little tidbit that's there. So if you see a 40/3, which is another weight that Aurifil makes, it means it's 3 strands that go together to make a 40 weight thread. So you'll find that 40 weight 2-ply is actually thinner than 40 weight 3-ply, but they still weigh 40. Okay. I could go on for hours, but actually this is much more interesting when you have Alex tell it to you in his beautiful Italian accent, and not my mishmash accent that we've got going on. So we're going to start with 12 weight thread. So 12 weight thread is wound onto a red spool. So I'm going to stop saying also, I cannot get that under control. 12 weight thread is wound on a red spool. All of the Aurifil's threads are color-coded on a spool so that provided you don't know how to read the label or don't know what it is, if you can remember a color or call me and say, Amy, I have this red spool, what weight is it? I'll be able to help you. So 12 weight, red spool. Comes in big spools, little spools, giant cones. Comes in all 270 colors of Aurifil. Now, we don't carry all 270 in the store, but we can pretty much get you anything that you want if you ask nicely. It is the heaviest weight thread that Aurifil has. It's perfect for hand applique, provided it's something that you want to see. Hand embroidery, hand quilting, cross stitch, embellishing, crazy quilting, handmade lace, machine applique, blanket stitch, machine embroidery. And machine embroidery especially for designs that are digitized for that thickness of thread. So when we talk about machine embroidery, yes, you can use cotton, but most embroidery designs have been digitized for a stitch or thread density of about 40 weight polyester, which is finer and probably equivalent to 50 weight cotton. So you just don't want to jump into a regular embroidery design with 12 weight thread and expect it to stitch beautifully. It works really well with like redwork designs or designs that were digitized for wool thread and things like that. So that works well. When you decide to use 12 weight thread by sewing machine, you need to use a thinner bobbin thread, okay? You do not want to put this on a bobbin. I mean, you can. You're not going to be happy with the way that it works out or how your machine cooperates with it, but you will want to find or get a coordinating color in about, let's say, 40 weight thread. And that way you've got 12 weight on top and 40 weight in the bobbin, only because it will be much nicer on your sanity when you're trying to figure it out. Your machines, typically your bobbin cases, whether you are a bobbin case or a drop-in bobbin, Those cases are typically tensioned for anywhere between 40 and 50 weight thread. I know that when we tension with a 50 weight cotton, because that's kind of 40 and 50 is kind of the middle of the road. So when you go to put something thicker or thinner in your bobbin cases, it should not be alarming if you need to adjust your upper tension to get the stitch to look the way that you want it. Now, it's also important that we use the proper needle. You are not going to get this through a 75 or an 80 needle, okay? You may. It's going to take you a while to do it, but it ain't going to happen, okay? And for those of you with Bernina 8 series machines, don't even try, okay? Because that needle threader is not going through the eye of that needle and pulling 2 strands of this back through the needle. Your machine will be in for service, okay? So when we go to this particular size thread, 12 weight, you want to be looking at like a top stitch needle, either a 100/16 or a 90/14 top stitch needle. A much larger eye and a much thicker diameter shaft and groove to be able to deliver the thread to the bobbin area easier. Okay, and we'll talk about needles at the end here. All right. Long armers, if you're a long armor and you want to quilt with 12 weight thread, you'll want to use a 4.5 needle. Now, Bernina long arms do not use long arm needles. So our long arms, the Bernina Q series, uses standard home domestic machine needles, so you'd be sticking with the top stitch needle. Other long arm brands use a different style of needle. So it's a 4.5 needle, and you may want to, because on long arms we can adjust our bobbin case tension, you may want to use more of a 28 weight in your bobbin on the long arm so it kind of matches front and back a little better with thread thickness. You also want to lengthen your stitch slightly and possibly use thread conditioner or silicone if you are having issues with thread breakage or anything like that, especially stitching at a high rate of speed that some long arms do stitch at. Next up is 28 weight. Now 28 weight is on a gray spool, okay? Big spools, little spools, cones, all 270 colors, okay? It's the second heaviest that we have. Perfect for double-stranded cross stitch, which is making a comeback. Blanket stitch, hand applique, hand piecing, machine quilting, fiber art, thread painting, hand quilting, bobbin and machine lace, machine quilting, long arm quilting, and can be used in the lower loopers of a serger, okay, without any issues. 28 weight thread is beautiful machine quilting or top stitching thread. I use it a lot for top stitching. I don't do a lot of machine quilting with it because I don't do very good machine quilting, and the last thing I want to be able to do is to see it or it stand out. So I will top stitch with this. I will also use it in bags and things like that, something a little thicker, a little stronger, and something to show up. When you go to use a 28 weight thread by machine, we recommend that you use a 40 to 50 weight thread in the bobbin, okay? Again, still thick. You can do it in your bobbin, but you will have to make some adjustments. So if you just match the color in a lighter weight of thread, you'll have less headache. Again, maybe operate slightly slower because you are working with a thicker fabric, and looking again at that top stitch needle of a 100/16 or a 90/14. Okay, and for the long armors, you could opt for a 40 weight in your bobbin with the 28 weight on top. Slow down your quilting, especially if you're going around curves, and a 4.0 long arm needle would be satisfactory for your 28 weight thread. If you have any questions, please put them in the comment section, and when we're done, I will go back through and try to answer them. And if you're watching this after it's live, just put them there and I monitor it, and we'll try to answer all of them afterwards as well. Next up is 40 weight. 40 is in a green spool, okay? A lot of us are very familiar with 40 weight. It's what we typically use for sewing bags, toys, quilting with it, top stitching. You can piece with it. It's not my preferred way to thread to piece with because of the amount of space it may take up in your seam allowance to get the perfect 1/4 of an inch, but it works in a pinch. But I do like to machine quilt with it, and I do, I actually hand bind a lot with 40 weight thread. Single, double, or triple single, double, or triple strand cross stitching. Hand piecing, really great for hand piecing, and I do have some that use it for hand quilting. Bobbin and machine, lace, machine applique, embroidery, machine embroidery, edge to edge, pantographs, and custom quilting on long arms. 8012 Microtex needle, or universal or a denim needle in a 9014. So 8012 Microtex, 9014 denim, or a 7511 quilting needle are good needles to use with the 40 weight thread. You can use the 40 weight thread both top and bottom. If you're running low, you can use 40 on top and 50 in the bottom. That works too. And then in a long arm quilter, you can use 3.5 or 4 long arm needle, and you can put 40 weight in top or 50 weight in the bobbin. So it's your choice. We do have a 40 weight 2-ply on the green spool, but recently, I guess about a year ago, Alex introduced a 40 weight 3-ply. So it's a little bit thicker on cones. Now I've got the ums. For long arm quilting. So it's a little bit stronger just because it's thicker for the machines that run at that higher rate of speed. And so that's where 40 weight 3-ply come in, and that's on yellow. Now we're all very familiar with the infamous orange spool, okay? The orange spool is 50 weight. 50 weight is the most popular and most common thread weight that we use in the quilting world. It is the weight that I prefer to piece with, machine quilt with, and pretty much do everything besides machine embroidery with. Slightly thinner creates a more accurate and thinner seam, which is why I prefer it for piecing over 40 or anything thicker. Best used needle turn applique, works really well for that. Can use it for English paper piecing, machine paper piecing, machine embroidery, all that good stuff there. When using 50 weight, again, the 8012 Microtex universal, you can even use an 8012 denim needle. Long armers, you will look at like a 4.0 long arm needle, and you can use 50 weight top and bottom as well. Now, up next is 80 weight. Okay, 80 is a fairly new weight thread. It comes only in 88 colors. It does not come in the full 270. It's a very thin, I actually have a hard time holding on to it. It's so thin you can barely feel it in your fingers. Perfect for English paper piecing. I actually left the world of using 50 weight thread and English paper piece with 80 weight. It's pretty much invisible. Hand applique, machine embroidery works beautifully with, especially if you're like quilting in the hoop. And it's wonderful machine quilting if you don't want to see your quilting. It just kind of disappears in the fabric so that you can't see, maybe you're not slightly perfect machine quilting. That's there. You can use a recommended needle is a 70 or 80 Microtex or embroidery needle, and you can use 80 weight both top and bottom. Definitely need a smaller needle. I actually think an 80 can be too big. Prefer a 75 or a 70. It is so fine. You do not need a large groove in that. So that's where I would recommend that. If you're hand sewing, we recommend around 12 to 18 inches of a tail when you are cutting thread off to hand piece width, because the longer you go, the more you're going to get knots or breakage or fraying with that. So typically, remember, we go from like needle to elbow is as long as a piece of thread that you should cut off for hand sewing. And then you do not need to thread condition this thread unless you want to. It shouldn't need to be run through beeswax or anything like that, but it's not really necessary, but you can do that. The other thread we have here is more of used for hand, although you can use it in machine. It's a 12 weight wool, okay, for my wool applicators. It is 50% acrylic, 50% wool, 192 colors. It's on a red spool just like the regular 12 weight. It does say wool on the end of it. One says cotton and one says wool. Really creates nice texture, kind of gives you the appearance of like using floss or 2-strand floss or 3-strand floss without having to split all of that floss. I like it because it's got a little bit of wool in it, so it looks really nice with wool applique. 90-14 top stitch needle if you're going to use it on machine, and I suggest 50 weight in the bobbin, okay, because again it is thick. You don't want to put this in your bobbin. Long arm quilters, the largest possible long arm needle that you can use with 28 weight in the bobbin, okay, and I have, it's hard to see, but I do have a little sample that you can even just tell from here. This starts with 80 and then we go all the way up. This is 12 weight regular and then 12 weight wool. So you can even just tell from here the difference in thickness of thread.
Did you tell them that the smaller the number, the thicker the thread?
Not yet. Okay. Monofilament, I just want to touch on using monofilament thread. No, don't do it. No. Don't put it on a bobbin. I can tell you that. That's the one thing I'm going to tell you to do. It's the perfect thing to use if you want to completely camouflage something. If you really don't want to be able to see it, monofilament is the way to go. You have clear for light fabrics, and then you have smoke colored for dark fabrics. I'm gonna stop that again. It's going to be, would suggest in the bobbin to match a 50 weight thread to the backing of your project. I do not wind monofilament on a bobbin. Just don't do it. Trust me. You will not be happy. Top tension when you use monofilament thread should be decreased to about a 2.0. Okay, so if you leave, what happens with monofilament, and I don't even have a spool. I thought I had a spool and I can't find it. What happens to monofilament as it runs through your tension discs, it gets warm and it stretches. And so that tension that the tension disc put on it stretch, and then when it finally gets to the needle and gets into your fabric, it relaxes and then it will break. And so that's why you get a lot of breakage with monofilament. So you want to drop your upper tension to about a 2. Put cotton thread in your bobbin, sew at a slower speed, and you would use a 80-12 or 70-10 top stitch needle or a Microtex sharp needle. You need something that's got a nice sharp end to it, a fine point, and a nice small eye, because the filament, the nylon filament, is very thin. Aurifloss. So Aurifil also makes a 6-strand floss. It comes on a little wooden spool, just like the 80 weight does. Okay, so the 80 weight and the floss come on a wood spool, and it's perfect for cross stitch, any hand embroidery, things like that. Can be easily split into 2, 3, 4, 5 strands, whatever you need. You need to match this is not to be used in the machine. Okay, this is hand only. You should match the size of your hand needle, the eye of the hand needle should match the diameter of the thread that you're using. If you use a needle with too large of an eye, you get a lot of stress and friction on the thread, which will weaken it and it eventually breaks. So if you're having a hard time with hand embroidery and thread keeps breaking, that could be one particular reason for that. Okay. So if you have to have a needle with a giant eye because you can't see to thread it, maybe we need to get you the right size needle eye and get a needle threader to help you get the thread in there, because it does make a huge difference if you use a needle with the right size eye for the thread that you are going to use. So that's a little bit about thread. Deep breath. Deep breath. The 12, okay, so just a little recap. 12 weight cotton, let me find it here, is a red spool. 12 weight wool is also a red spool, and you can tell a difference. It's hard to see here, but you can tell a difference when you're looking at the strand of thread, which one's cotton and which one's wool. You have 28 weight is gray, 40 weight is green, 50 weight is orange, 80 weight and floss come on a cherry wood spool. Now I don't know, I just want to point out here that, well, this spool's almost empty, but the end of this spool comes off, and that's usually where you find the tail of your thread when you buy a spool of Aurifil. So don't try to snip the paper or snip the plastic or try to find a tail. Just twist off the end of the spool and unwind the thread, okay? And then you can put this back on if you so choose. Or you can put this on your machine without the end cap on it at all. And there was a little video that went around the other day that uses the empty spools to turn tubes. So if I find that video again, I will share it. But you can use this to turn tubes when you're finished. At least little tubes. A little bit about needles.
Needles.
Here is Amy's giant needle or weapon of choice.
I love that needle.
So we're going to talk about needles. We sell in the store Schmetz needles. When you got your machines, you had a package of Bernina branded needles. There is Goetz Beckert. There's a lot of other brands, Class A, on the market. For the most part, needles are needles. You'll find the ones that you like. I like Schmetz. It's my preferred brand. I like the Bernina needles too. It's just Schmetz is more known, and people that don't own Berninas think they can't use a Bernina needle. So it's just a little all around for those that own Berninas and those that don't, even though they're not specifically for Bernina machines. Sewing machine needles are the cheapest part for your machine that can do the most monetary damage if you don't change them. Sewing machine needles are not indestructible, okay? They're not gonna last forever. The points of that needle get dull the longer you sew, and the thicker the fabric that you're going through, and if you are a bad person and sew and hit pins. So you want to be conscious of replacing your needle. It can be, you know, every project. It can be every 8 hours of sewing, that type of thing. But you've got to be conscious of changing your needle. You will know that damaged or worn needles usually have some signs that they're telling you that they need to be changed. One, if your thread keeps breaking. If your thread keeps breaking or shredding, specifically at the point of the needle, it's possible that you either have a needle that needs to be changed or you have a wrong size needle, okay? The other thing that it does is if you're getting skip stitches or uneven stitches, a lot of times that has to do with a damaged, worn needle or the wrong size needle for the thread that you're using. Puckered or damaged fabric, so damaging fabric like it's putting a run in it, poking too large of a hole or anything like that. That is, again, damaged needles or worn needles that need to be changed. And popping sounds. You can hear that needle working hard when it's dull and needs to be changed. Okay? Now, when it comes to what size needle do I need for the thread that I'm doing and for the project that I'm sewing. So there are two things that go into the concept of picking a needle. One is thread size. The thicker the thread means not always does it mean you need a bigger needle. Okay, and bigger needle comes in terms of the diameter of the shaft changes. It can mean you need a different style of needle. So when I talk styles, I'm talking denim, universal, Microtex, things along that lines. An 80-12 Microtex is very different than an 80-12 denim needle because of what they were designed to be sewing through. Microtexes were designed for tightly woven fabrics, microfibers, things along that, and your denims were designed for denim. So the denim thread, the denim needles were designed to be sewing with denim, i.e. you would be using thicker thread because you think top stitching and sewing through multiple layers of denim is thicker thread. So what happens in a denim needle is there is a groove that runs down the front of your needle. You don't usually see it, but you can feel it. But this groove changes size, okay? That size correlates to the strand of thread. And so what you want is you want the strand of thread to lay in this groove just nicely. If that groove is too big or too small, the thread will either get lost in it or not stay where it belongs when it goes down to the bobbin area. And then you can't get, the hook can't get a hold of the needle, the loop that's created, and then you get skipped, looped, all sorts of things. The other thing that also changes is the eye of the needle. So depending upon the style and size of the needle is going to depend upon the size and the shape of the eye. So, for example, let's see if I can get this too. This is the same size needle. It's just all that's changed is the type. So this is a universal needle, has a very small eye. A embroidery needle, it's about the same size, but a metallic needle, it's double the height. So that will make a difference in just choosing the style of needle. So it's not always the size of the needle that's the problem, it's the style. There's lots of them. I very rarely use a universal needle today. I will use it every once in a while, but majority of the time when I am piecing a quilt, I will be using a Microtex needle. When I quilt to quilt, depending upon batting and thickness and seam allowances, I will use a quilting needle. I've even been known to use a smaller denim needle on my machine. You will know or kind of have an idea if your thread's not playing well and all you did was you've cleaned it, you've oiled your machine, you've done everything. Try a different needle, not just a different same size needle. Go up a size of needle or go down a size of needle. Kind of look at the way that the thread is coming through the eye of the needle, especially if the thread is breaking at the needle. Okay, if the thread is breaking at the eye of the needle or right there in that path, typically that's a problem. Thread goes through the eye of the needle like a ton of times before it actually lands in your fabric. And if you don't believe me, take some white thread, put a little mark up at the top by the spool and see how far you can sew until that thread hits your fabric. It is way farther than you think that the length of that thread is. So the thread passes through the eye of that needle a lot before it ever lands in fabric, which is why quality thread also comes into play with thread breakage. And some of you may have seen, it's not that it's a new article, it's been around for a while, but looking at thread under a microscope. So this is your Aurifil 50 weight, nice clean underneath a microscope. Look at that. That's bargain bin, cheap, cheap, cheap thread. Very, very linty, and that's even before it sews with it. So you can only imagine how much lint and swear words that are going to come out of your mouth when you are trying to sew. Here's Coates and Clark. Dual duty. Not my favorite. Probably my least favorite thread. Along with Connecting Threads Essentials. Come on, ladies. Let's use some good thread. So, which is why if you bring a machine to me, sometimes I tell you it works perfectly fine is because I'm using different thread than you are. Okay? So, sometimes it's all about thread. Now, some things about thread as well is that changing thread can may need a tension change. Okay, so you may need to look at tension changing. Too much thread, too many thread fibers at space will cause fabric to pucker. So if you're having fabric puckering issues and you're using a thick thread, maybe you need to look at increasing your stitch length. Okay, can help some of that thread puckering. Reducing the density or scale your pattern in size, that will help that, like I said. And then the eye of the needle should be 40% bigger than the diameter of the thread. Okay, so when going to a larger size thread, a larger needle should be used. And remember, the more a thread weighs, the less or the thinner it is. Okay, so that 80 weight is super fine and 28 weight is thick. In needle sizes, it's the opposite. The smaller the number of the needle, the thinner, the finer the needle is. Therefore, the finer the fabric it should be used on. I know. Nobody can like pick one scale and, do everything consistent. We have to, remember two things. Although I like the way thread is weighed and I wish that's the way we weighed. The more I weighed, the thinner I was. And I wouldn't feel the need to go on a diet. And I could just eat all I wanted and be thin. Now, do I have questions? I'm going to give me a few minutes, give me a second here. I'm going to go back through all of this information. I hope I wasn't too long-winded and it was informative.
Jennifer, is there a video for oiling my machine?
There is. I did post videos about oiling machines. If you go back to the post where I had put out the post with the pink background that said stop and change your needle and oil your machines, that in the comment section of that post, I did post links to videos for oiling a 4 series, 5 series, 7 series, 8 series, and classic Bernina hook machines. So it is on there. And if you can't find it, just send me a message from the page and I will link you to the video directly. But it's important to clean and oil your machine. We've taken a lot of phone calls. Everybody's so focused at making masks and getting things done and whatnot. And a lot of it is just slow down, step away,
have a glass of wine,
clean it, oil it, that type of thing, and come back. And it will make a huge difference if you just walk away for a moment.
Order any color we need.
I can, yes. Yes, Miss Debbie, that is completely unrelated, but yes, you can use wash away instead of tear away.
Is 80 weight strong enough for higher speeds quilting?
Yes, you can use 80 weight thread in a long arm. You may just have to slow it down slightly, and put a, I've used it both top and bottom on a domestic machine. I have not used it on the Q series.
Jennifer Bell, is it okay to sew with embroidery needles? No.
The 12 weight thread is on a red spool. Noelle, I don't have Aurifloss, but I can get some for you. Let's see. If I can find, everything keeps disappearing here.
About sewing with embroidery needles, Jennifer.
Kendra, for thread weight on top stitching vinyl or heavier fabric on a bag, I would either use 40 weight, would be just fine. If you wanted it to still kind of blend. If you were looking for it to kind of show up and be decorative, then 28 weight is the way that the direction I would go. The difference between quilting needles and a Microtex needle, if you give me 1 second, I will pull that up. I have it on my other computer here, and I'll come back to that. Yes, Miss Jackie, they have changed the oiling pins. We actually have now little tubes, not a pen, but it still has the little small tip on it. So it is much easier. Yes, Miss Lori, the lint that you're getting from quilting is from Soft and Stable. It's not from your thread. The Soft and Stable fibers from the tricot and the actual foam itself is what you are seeing in the machine. All right, difference between a quilting needle and a Microtex needle. I just want to make sure that I quote this correctly. I wonder where I put it. Let's see. Any other questions? It's fun just to play around with thread weights. I've got more thread than I know what to do with, to be honest. But it's fun to play with. I do love 80 weight Kelly for English paper piecing. I started learning with, I think it was 60 weight polyester is what I was trained with or taught in a class that I took. And it's fine. And I actually think sometime we were using 50 weight 2-ply, another class that I took. But the 80 weight is really, really invisible. So if you're having a hard time getting the thread to, when you open your English paper piecing and you're having a hard time keeping it invisible, the 80 weight will make a huge difference. So the difference between a Microtex needle and a quilting needle is the quilting needle it's tapered at the end. So it starts out wider and gets narrower at the point. So it's been kind of engineered for quilting, machine quilting, whereas a Microtex needle is skinny all the way down. Very, very slim needle. So it was designed for polyesters, microfibers, silks, leather, some coated materials, that type of thing. So it leaves a smaller hole, whereas a quilting needle, it starts out thin to get through it, and then it gets larger as the needle goes deeper to get through batting and things along that lines. So I hope that makes sense. Let's see.
Miss Jeannie has a question.
Lori, sewing with knits with Aurifil, I use polyester when I sew knits. I don't use cotton, just mostly because of washing and drying and garments and stuff. I typically have a tendency to stay with a polyester thread. Yes, Miss Joyce, you can embroider with a Microtex needle.
Why?
A lot of us embroider with Microtex needles in the industry because it does leave such a small hole and a sharp point. Needles in a vintage machine, Miss Connie, as long as the needle system is the correct needle system. And what I mean by that is, hold on, let me get a package of needles here. when you look at a package of needles, and I know it's backwards, but you'll see the letters typically say 135/705H. This is the needle system. And so what that means, definition-wise, it means that there's a flat back to the needle, and it's a certain length and height and all that, designed for today's modern machines. And it just means that it has that flat shank for perfect positioning of the needle when it goes down to the hook and the needle bar. So it just, that all means. So some vintage machines may not use a 705H. I know I have a couple of vintage Berninas that use 705Bs, which if you put a 705H in the machine, it doesn't make a stitch. That type of thing. So you kind of have to know what needle system. There are not as many variety of needles if they're not using a 705H machine. I know that we can kind of, I think we have to get more along the lines of the Organ brand needle than Schmetz. I think a majority of Schmetz is now 705Hs just because there aren't as many machines that don't use that needle system. You don't want to use Singer needles in any other machine but a Singer, especially if your Singer is designed to thread from left to right. Those needles are not going to work.
Flat and
exactly.
Flat to the left.
So you just want to be cautious about grabbing any old package of needle. And if you're not sure, if you put the needle in the machine and it doesn't sew right, it's possible that it's just the needle itself. Okay?
Miss Judy wants to know if you use Isacord machine when you use the cloth.
If Isacord. So we talked about cotton. So the polyester brand that I like is Isacord. It's color fast, heat, bleach resistant, all of that stuff. Strong. It's a commercial grade thread used in factories that we use in a home machine. I actually, on my Q series long arm machines, we quilt with it, both top and bottom. And that's what I would use, Miss Judy. If you are quilting with Isacord, I would put it both top and bottom. That's there. I think that is about it for tonight. I think I tried to answer a lot of questions.
In a smaller number.
And I tried to maybe not talk so long, but maybe I failed at that one tonight. I have no idea what we're going to talk about tomorrow, or what time it will be. But again, if you like or comment on this video, you will get entries into the drawing, and I will draw the winner of the next goodie bag for this video tomorrow night. After I finish here tonight, I will draw last night's winner and post it in the Facebook group. So
we're going to celebrate with brownie.
Yes, we're going to go upstairs now, and I'm going to celebrate our birthday with a brownie. And a giant glass of orange juice, because that's how I like my brownies. Full of walnuts and a glass of OJ. I know. It's strange.
She's weird.
It's strange. Well, I hope everybody has a great evening. And again, just give me a little bit, and I will get all of this information posted up in the files section of the Facebook group for you to reference back at a later date. So, thank you guys. Have a great evening, and I will be back with you tomorrow. Thanks. Have a good night.